you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you. This is awesome.
We have
Hey, how are y'all? We doing good?
Everyone go around the room and sit. No, I'm kidding.
We are going to start this conversation with a few news of the day questions, as we always do, and then we'll get right into the topic of small business.
Okay.
Jake, I'll let you start us off.
I'll start because I've covered you since 2010 when you had a full head of hair. No, I'm kidding.
Well, listen, you make a good point, by the way.
About your
I
hair?
came, of course. I came to Congress with an afro, and the longer I was there, the more of my hair I pulled out. So you're not completely wrong.
I don't remember that.
Nor do I, actually. You started it, so I had to continue it.
You unveiled legislation targeting reform of capital markets today that we wrote about this morning in our AM edition. Our reporters, Brendan Peterson and Laura Weiss, who cover financial services and tax for us, scooped that this morning. Co-sponsored by almost all of the Senate Banking Committee Republicans. Give me what your goal is and what chances you think it has of moving forward.
Well, Jake, I think the last, I hate to do this, but I like to stand. So I'm going to come down there for 1 second.
Okay.
It's
a town hall now.
Yes. My mama wanted to preach her, so I got to stand up and give a little word
This
here.
might be a first for Punchbowl News, but alas.
Truth is that when you listen to the last panelist, they did a really good job of distilling some of the really important business issues. As a kid growing up in poverty, one of the things I always wanted to do was to have a way to have my mom not just have a house, but have a garage where she could literally drive into the garage and be safe. And for me, I thought that was either football or business. And when you listen to the last panel, what you conclude with is capital for businesses is really, really hard to find. When I started my Allstate insurance franchises, I literally went to the bank with a asset. It was a 9-year-old car, 253,000 miles on it. I was living in an apartment, and the banker said, dude, that's not an asset. That's a liability. I said, bro, that's the only way I'm getting to work today. That's an asset for me. Finding access to capital is so darn hard. And what the Empowering Main Street bill does is it makes it easier for would-be entrepreneurs to present their case to their community in such a way that if the community wants to invest in their business, they get a yes. If we can find more ways to reduce their hurdles, create more access to capital, have more folks in the same room that can say, yes, I like your idea, I like your business plan, let's do it. That's what the bill does. And for me, had it not been for someone in the community who knew me, who believed in me, who trusted me, who decided to write a check, I would not be here today, because it's that important for all of us to recognize when capital is elusive, communities do not grow and prosper. Communities without small businesses in their communities are the communities that are going to be left behind. And unfortunately and disproportionately, that's the African American and the Hispanic communities that are consistently left behind, because finding capital is so darn hard. If you're starting a business from the ground up without the relationships and the influencers in your oikos, in your natural space of influence, you find yourself lagging further and further behind. And so Empowering Main Street really is my way of having a vision about bringing more decision makers in the same room so that they can make the same decisions. Say, yes, I like the business plan. Yes, I'll invest in the business. And yes, we'll take that calculated risk to transform lives and communities.
Are we supposed to stand up and ask questions now, or how does this work?
Well, I invite you to sit down.
Yeah, I can't promise y'all stay seated.
Okay.
It's just the way I work.
All right. So one other question we wanted to ask you is, I did hear, it's tough.
I can't help myself. I can't help myself.
I appreciate it.
This is a first in Punchbowl News history.
I like to be the first in
Is
some
that
things.
Gary Gensler, SEC chair, was supposed to come to your committee tomorrow,
Yes.
and there's word that that's not going to happen. What's
What
the deal with
gives?
that?
Yeah, I just found out it was breaking news. Gensler is not coming. Listen, if I were him, I wouldn't come either, because we got a lot of hard questions for him that I think both left and right agree on the fact that stifling access to capital, having an SEC that is more burdensome and regulatory driven than it is actually achieving the goal of making it easier for folks to have access to capital. That was going to be the direction of my questions tomorrow. I'm not sure why he's not coming. He said scheduling challenges. I'm not sure what that means anymore. But in the end,
the challenge is he doesn't want to come from.
well, you know, you heard it first from Jake, not from me. I don't disagree.
Well, he's at the House today, so he is.
He can
he's
be
up-
around, right? And so the other thing, though, that has been troubling with the SEC is their approach to cryptocurrency and digital assets. I know it's still a controversial topic. I know the fact of the matter is that some people don't necessarily believe in the industry, but I believe that if we're going to be the greatest economy on the planet, it requires innovation to happen in America. So we have to innovate before we regulate to make sure that those new forms of opportunities populate America and Americans first, and then we spread it to the rest of the world. And in the area of digital assets, here's a place where Gensler and the SEC finds themselves out of step with the average American. And frankly, younger Americans today are leaning into the digital world more than perhaps any other demographic in the country. And so denying access to the opportunity is really denying access to their economic future and perhaps their political future as well.
I'm going to combine a couple questions here about the election and about what your future might be. You have a pretty good map, Republicans. I said the opposite to Senator Shaheen, who Democrats have a tough map, although you guys have a lot of tight races around the country.
We do.
Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, Ohio, and the list goes on and on. How do you feel about Senate prospects? How do you feel about former President Trump's prospects? And you are going to probably go in the administration, right?
So,
Slide that one right in
Okay,
there.
stand up for that one.
see you later. I got to go. That's all there is to it. On the Senate, this is just me being me. I'm sorry. This is the way it works. So on the Senate side, I think we are really in a very positive position. Ultimately, Jake, Anna, business owners, I think there's no doubt that if we can win in West Virginia, and I think if our candidate is breathing, we're going to win in West Virginia. That gets us to 50.
If your candidate's breathing, yeah, I think that's
Probably
right.
even if he's not breathing, he's winning in West Virginia, to be honest with you. Second thing is, I think today we're leading in Montana. I think that's a good seat for us. Ohio, more difficult, but possible. Pennsylvania it's probably within a 4 or 5 point range, depending on the polls you see. Very, very possible. If you haven't met Sam Brown from Nevada, here is a man who served his country and wears the scars over his entire body for his service to this country. And I can't think of a better American who would do a really good job in the United States Senate. He is a true American hero. I think he's probably 3 or 4 points back, so we'll need to close very aggressively. Mike Rogers in Michigan is also former FBI agent, former member of Congress who served the nation pretty well as well. So we've got some really competitive races. We win 2 out of the 5 or 6. We get back the majority. I become the chairman of the banking committee. From my perspective, it's probably better for me to, no matter who wins. If Harris wins, there's no chance of going to the administration.
I don't think you're going to get the call there.
I think you're exactly right. Yes. If Trump wins, I still think that I'm probably better off serving the people of our country as chairman of the banking committee as opposed to going into the administration. We'll see what happens, obviously, but in the end, my hope is that I have a chance to cast a vision about what's possible for this nation economically and do what was done for me, which was create opportunities that led to real transformation of a community.
And we'll probably have a better chance of getting you for an event if you're chair of the Senate Banking Committee rather than.
I want to do everything I can to support small businesses.
Yes.
There you go.
That's
we
why
like
I'm
that.
here.
We like that.
Let's shift to that. Let's shift to that topic of small business
Yes,
and
ma'am.
America's economic future. We were talking with the Senator Shaheen about small businesses and priorities for the end of the year, looking to have an omnibus probably. What do you think could get done before the end of the year? Are there any priorities you have for a package in the small business realm, and then maybe even project a little bit into the new Congress?
Well, certainly we just introduced our Empowering Main Street. I'd love to see that become a reality. I'd love to see more business owners have access to capital as soon as humanly possible. That likely will take until next year.
Yeah.
I think the lame duck's going to be it's going to be a freak show in the lame duck, to be honest with you. It's going to be fascinating to watch all these folks come together and try to figure out how to knit together a Christmas tree package called a bill that passes. And so that process has begun in earnest several weeks ago, actually, probably 2 months ago. And we're going to see what happens with that Christmas tree. I mean, everyone's attaching to the NDAA, the must-pass vehicle, what they want. So I think that's the most likely outcome, is that the NDAA gets done with a host of things unrelated to our national defense being a part of that package. Secondly, I'd say that there certainly is some interest in tax extenders and things getting done in the financial space. I find that to be a little more difficult to see happening, to be honest with you.
With the caveat that it really depends on whether former President Trump wins or Vice President Kamala Harris wins. Next year for tax policy is huge.
Indeed.
I mean, you have a whole host of tax provisions up for renewal. How do you give me your assessment of where you think things are going to head?
Yeah, I think no matter who wins the race, Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, the truth is that tax reform will be on the docket. It's absolute essential. The question is, how do we help the American people avoid a $4 trillion tax increase, the largest tax increase in the history of our country? I think both sides will be interested in doing that. I think, obviously, that under President Trump, we would have an opportunity to extend the TCJA from 2017. It would take us winning the House, winning the Senate, so the trifecta. It will be a vehicle of reconciliation, which, of course, as you already know, requires 51 senators to be on the same page as opposed to the 60. And so getting it through the parliamentarians will be the hard, parliamentarian will be the hard thing, to be frank. So extending the $4 trillion worth of tax cuts would be the first objective. Second objective, President Trump has been talking a lot about how to focus on working class Americans, whether you look at his proposal or at least his comments around exempting tips from taxation or overtime from taxation or Social Security from taxation. All these issues really recalibrates our focus on everyday working Americans and looking for ways to make sure that we're taking into consideration the folks who are struggling paycheck to paycheck and looking for ways to meet the moment.
Can I just follow up on that for one thing? Bloomberg had a headline this morning that said, effectively, I'm paraphrasing, so many tax cuts, it's tough to keep track. I mean, how do you, those are a lot of cuts to taxes, and are those all doable?
Well, I certainly think that, the question is, can you get 51 people in the Senate to agree on the same thing? Let us pray, because that is hard work in any environment, perhaps harder now than it's ever been, even harder than it was in 2017 when we were able to get, I think, 51 out of 52 to say yes to the same thing. There's a lot of tension in politics, not news to anybody here, I'm sure. Thank you, Jake. Appreciate that. And so getting people on the same page, I think, is really an important part. I think we'll get something done, and my hope is that we will focus where we focused in 2017. I had the good privilege of the fortune of writing the personal side of the tax code for the Senate Republicans, and one of the things I focused on was a single mom like the one that raised me. We reduced her tax burden to the federal government by 73%. I hope we start with the working class folks who desperately need more of their resources in their own pockets in order to meet the moment. Number two, I hope that we understand and appreciate that capitalism requires capital. The more you tax capital, the less you have of capitalism. Therefore, the fewer businesses will be created around the country. And so one proposal on the left has to do with taxing unrealized capital gains. I'm not sure how you do that, how you pay it. On the other side, we want to continue to reduce the burden, which allows for more capital to cycle through the economy, which in the end helps everybody, but specifically you create more working class jobs. And without doing that, then you're actually going to starve the bottom of the food chain economically, where I grew up, and that's a terrible concept, because some of the most talented people that I know lived in neighborhoods that I lived in but never had access to opportunity. And so focusing on how to bring opportunities back to those neighborhoods, as we did through my Opportunity Zone legislation, is incredibly important. It brought over $84 billion into the poorest communities, majority minority communities that have seen 8% raise in 8% wage growth, 60% increase in the property values, and about 70% of the people, I believe it was, owning their own property, which means, and only less than a 5% gentrification rate. So we were able to make people's lives better, make communities stronger, and attract more jobs to folks who can't really afford the transportation to get to them, at least in my communities. where I grew up. So that's the kind of stuff that we should be working on. If we do that and we do that well, I believe you'll see a brighter day, morning in America again.
So you mentioned at the top that you were a small business owner.
Yes.
We've been kind of talking around the country this past year with a lot of small business owners, kind of the challenges that they do. Goldman Sachs, 10,000 Businesses does surveys about it. One of those issues has really been workforce.
Yes.
You have become a big advocate around apprenticeships as one way to solve those workforce challenges. Can you talk about the programs that you were thinking about and how they might be beneficial for employers and
sure.
workers?
Well, Anna, if you just start with the net effect of having a job, your life is better, your community gets better, your family is better. And you look at what are the hurdles for business owners to say, I'm going to take the calculated chance, not a risk, but a calculated chance on hiring someone without the skills to do the job. Well, if we can lower the hurdles, i.e. the cost of hiring that person, then the more likely the employer is to bring more people into the workforce. You do that through apprenticeship programs. And the way that we did it was we focused on basically the long-term unemployed, typically a little older Americans, and wanted to make sure they had access to that job. So we created a tax credit that is larger than those for younger employees. And so, but both were incentivized to do the right thing, which is to take a second look at the talent pool. I'd say this though, if we're going to help people get better jobs, we're going to have to focus on our K through 12 education system. Because the truth of the matter is the closest thing to magic in America is a good education. And unfortunately today, communities, once again, the poorest communities, whether it's the inner city, like Chicago or a rural part of Iowa, those kids today are less educated than they need to be to meet the needs of our very, very diverse workforce and workforce needs. And so what we need to do is make sure that we're focusing our attention on K through 12 education and providing parents with a choice so the kid has a better chance to succeed.
Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Voices polls and surveys their small business owners. One of the big issues that comes up regularly is that hiring and retaining workers is a big challenge. What could be done at the federal, state level? What is done? What has worked in South Carolina, your state, which is a beautiful state?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
What could be done? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we could do Punchbowl in Charleston, South Carolina.
Don't give Anna ideas.
I love Charleston.
Anna,
Come on, let's
do
go.
Next time we do this, I required a prerequisite is doing it in Charleston,
All
South
right,
Carolina, or at
you
least
heard
in
it here
South Carolina.
first. It wasn't me.
South Carolina. Jake, I'm sorry,
Don't
buddy.
give her. I love it
You-
there,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I mean,
So one of the things works. If you think about retention, the retention factor comes down to a couple. Number one is how competitive are you in the job market with wages? Number two, what's your benefit package for small businesses? In South Carolina, we have about 840,000 people working for small businesses. Small businesses represent about 99% of the businesses. So about 40% of the people who work in South Carolina work for a small business. The truth, though, that is, when I started my small business, I had 7 employees in my insurance business, a few more in my real estate business. But those are micro business systems for the most part, right?
Yep.
The challenge, of course, is putting together your benefits package. It is so darn hard and expensive for a small business. You know nothing about this, right?
Anna handles
I'm
that.
like,
side.
yes.
I had a feeling, right? So
I
here's
just chase people around hallways.
yeah. So here's the challenge, right? We need to make it easier for small businesses to pool their employees so that the health insurance rates come down. We need to make it easier for a small business owner to start something called like a simplified 401k so that you're able to not only attract the employees, but retain the employees by having the kind of benefit structure that says, yes, we value you even beyond the paycheck. The average business spends between 30 and 40% of their resources on benefits. If you can't afford the human resource department and the legal department, you just say, you know what, I'm going to pay you the salary, you figure it out. That is
You're
not how you
speaking Anna's language.
but that's not how
No,
you retain
it's like,
employees.
you can't.
It
It's not
doesn't
competitive.
work. You've got to find a way to make it easier for businesses, small businesses and micro businesses to pull those resources. So what we've done in the past is we've focused on making sure that's a reality. And there's legislative vehicles to get there. But in the end, we just need to use common sense to make sure that the average small business owner understands what's available. And when I went into business, I had no clue what was available. So we need to almost have a portal where folks can go online and figure out, how do I start a simplified 401k without the liabilities associated with these plans? How do I reduce my healthcare costs by 30+% because that's a way of keeping and retaining employees? How do I create an employee's manual that also includes things like how many days off do you get when you're sick? Do I have the kind of tax incentives or credits? Deb Fisher, leading mind on the right, around making sure that paid leave is a part of the conservative approach to employment. And she's done a fabulous job with her approach to making sure that we have that considered. So we just need more time to populate the ether system with what's possible, and then let there be a competitive environment. If you don't like me or my approach to providing resources, at least let's have a place where there's a competition. And today's public forum doesn't allow for a serious conversation or competitive debate on the underlying topics that actually help people prosper and succeed.
Sorry, go ahead.
We are almost out of time, but I
We
want
just started.
All right, we're here all day.
All right.
I want to end on this though, because I think
Yes,
it's
ma'am.
important. We had the fireside chat. We had two kind of CEOs who've been running businesses since 2016 talk, and their last word that they wanted to give to all the lawmakers and the staff and the advocates who are here and listening on the live stream was not just access to capital, but affordable capital.
Yes.
Talk about what federal programs, what can you do? You potentially will be the Senate banking chair next year. Basel III, talk about it.
Well, Basel III is Michael Barr's approach on the Federal Reserve to making our banking system safer. The question is, are we already safe enough? And the stress test, or the process that banks go through to make sure that they can meet the challenges in the marketplace based on the 2008, the disaster that happened there. The answer is, for every stress test that I've heard of, every bank or financial institution is prepared to meet that moment times 3. So if you put even more capital on the sidelines to meet a regulatory standard, that means there are fewer dollars that are less affordable to meet the needs of small businesses. And so when you think about Basel III, think about it as denying capital and resources to small businesses who desperately not only need the resources, but need to be able to afford those resources. And so the more capital we see in the marketplace, the more activity we see in the marketplace financially, the cost comes down and the businesses go up. And that's really healthy for our businesses. And so what we're going to do is continue to push back on those legislative priorities and regulatory realities that are being crafted in hopes, and I think, I could be naive here, the intentions are good, but the misunderstanding of free markets is devastating, and it's just the way it is. And so our ability to craft what I have, the Empowering Main Street, that makes it easier for crowdfunding, for businesses that are trying to pool resources together, it makes it much easier for that to happen. That will happen, prayerfully. At the same time, we have to make sure that the regulatory environment doesn't make capital so expensive. And frankly, the more expensive capital, the fewer first-time would-be business owners will go into business. The fewer first-time home buyers will buy a home.
Let me ask one more question before we get the hook.
Take your time.
Before you, if you are Senate banking chair, you've listed a lot of priorities. Give us some, a couple more bullet points of what your big agenda items are at the top of that committee, which has very broad oversight over a lot of different facets of the economy.
Yeah, so one we haven't talked a lot about that doesn't come up very often is the national security portfolio and the banking committee. We have the ability to play a significant role because of our ability to control the banking system. Our first line of defense ought not be our kinetic options on the table from a military perspective.
Right.
It should be our economy, and it is our economy. And so here's an example. Fentanyl is devastating American families in a way that very few things have in my lifetime. 70,000 Americans losing their lives to fentanyl. I crafted legislation that would freeze the assets of the Mexican cartels that today have about $20 billion flowing through the banking systems. 23-0. We were able to get every Republican and every Democrat on the same page on that legislation to freeze their assets. If that became law, that's the kind of stuff that the banking committee would be very proud of. I talked about digital assets for just a moment earlier. Its time has come, and it is now. We're going to either lead the world or follow the world. I think we should lead the world. So having a framework in place would be really helpful. Number three, the burdensome regulatory environment, whether it's the SEC or the CFPB, we have a lot of work to do to have responsible regulatory environment and not an oppressive regulatory environment. And finally, housing. We have the real estate or urban development as a part of the banking umbrella. African American home ownership is around 41%. Hasn't changed much in 50 years. Hispanics around 60, white Americans well over 75%, Asians near there and starting to climb even higher. We need to take an approach to providing affordable homes. I have something called the Road to Housing legislation that really reduces the cost of home ownership by reducing the cost of a closing, by getting rid of the red tape that makes it so hard. Should we have a tax credit or deduction for PMI, which is mortgage insurance? There are some things that we can do that actually reduces the cost of home ownership. And there are proposals today that would actually do the exact opposite, even though with good intentions. And so the world thinks of the banking committee as banking, but the fact of the matter is it's banking, it's housing, it's urban development, it's flood insurance, it's insurance, it's real estate. So we have a massive portfolio, so I'd work on some of that as well.
All right, Senator Scott, we're going to leave it there. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. We appreciate it.